At least 12 people have been killed in Ukraine over the weekend after Russia launched a major drone and missile attack on the capital, Kyiv. It came as Russia and Ukraine were swapping hundreds of prisoners as part of a rare moment of cooperation between the warring neighbours amid failed efforts to reach a ceasefire. Well, let's get more on this with journalist Emmanuelle Chaze, who joins us now from Kyiv. Emmanuelle, Ukrainian officials have described these latest attacks as the largest aerial assault since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 3 years ago. What is the latest on this?
Well, indeed, Yvonne, we've seen a varying pattern over the weekend. First, from the night of Friday to Saturday, there were over 250 drones launched at Ukraine, as well as dozens of missiles. Then from Saturday to Sunday, it was almost 300. And last night, we've experienced the worst attack to date with over 350 drones, as well as 9 missiles. And it is a worrying pattern. As much as the Ukrainian population is being used to such attacks, the intensity, the violence of the attacks, and also some changes that we've noticed, like the drones are arriving in swarms and in several waves across the cities. They are flying very low. I mean, I've experienced it firsthand here in the city center of Kyiv. They're flying very low. You can hear it very well, and they crash nearby. And even when they are intercepted, and the majority of them is being intercepted, well, the debris that fall, they're highly inflammable, and they do crash into residential buildings. And over the weekend, it's almost 20 people who lost their lives in such strikes, and over 80 people who are injured. So it's very hard for the Ukrainian population on a daily basis, and worrying that those strikes are intensifying.
It must be absolutely terrifying. How do these latest strikes compare to previous ones in terms of the areas that are being targeted?
Well, the areas targeted are the same. For example, here in Kyiv, the city center was targeted. You have to bear in mind that you have a lot of institutions here, international institutions, but also ministries, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Defense Ministry, and of course the presidential offices. All those institutions, of course, in the scope of the war, they are being targeted by the aggressor country, which is Russia. But usually, I have to say, you feel a sense of safety in the city center because you know that air defense is working quite efficiently. And indeed, most drones are being stopped, intercepted, or rerouted by air defense. However, because of the sheer number of drones, this is becoming more dangerous. You could hear over those past 3 nights really explosions during lasting hours. So it was a new sense of danger, I must say. Of course, people are used to hearing explosions in the center of the city, but it's usually from afar. It usually doesn't, come so close to home for millions of people. Kyiv is a city where there's over 3 million people living here. There's a lot of people who are displaced people coming from the east. They came to the capital to seek shelter from Russian bombs, and even here, bombs are, continuing to affect civilians.
And it's even shocked the US President. Donald Trump has lashed out at Vladimir Putin in the wake of this attack. How rare was that criticism, and do you think it'll have any impact on what Russia does next?
Personally, I do not think it's going to have any impact on Russia's action, simply because Russia hasn't changed its course of action over the past 3 years. It has launched a full-scale invasion against Ukraine with the clear goal is to make Ukraine surrender and to subjugate the Ukrainian population, as well as subjugate the Ukrainian army along the front line. This hasn't changed one bit. And even in those past few weeks, we've heard a lot of talks about ceasefire, about negotiations, especially in the West. Ukrainians were all, they were being very surprised about all that noise, shall I say, because they know who is attacking them. Russia has never respected ceasefires, and there has been a history of dozens of such ceasefires brokered since 2014, and a history of treaties, in fact, since the independence of Ukraine in the early 90s. And those treaties, those ceasefires haven't been respected by the Russian side. So Ukrainians also being under daily attack by Russia, they don't see why Moscow would change its stance now. And there's not just the air raid alerts, the air raid attacks by Russia. There's also the pressure, the immense pressure being put by Russian troops on the front line.
And the US has said it will either continue trying to broker these peace talks or walk away if progress doesn't follow. What's Kyiv's view on this?
Well, Kyiv doesn't want to antagonize Washington. The partnership between the US and Ukraine, of course, is very important for Ukrainians, for their government. The US has been instrumental in the Ukrainian resistance to the Russian aggression over those past 3 years. But also, there's something that has gone a little bit amiss, I would say, those past few weeks when we talked about ceasefires and negotiations, is the fact that whether or not Ukraine benefits from US support, Ukrainians will simply not stop fighting. This is really a war of survival for every single Ukrainian. And of course, things would be much more difficult if the US walks away, doesn't support Ukraine, especially militarily, because the diplomatic side doesn't work anyway with Russia. But Ukrainians will keep on fighting. For them, this is really a matter of survival.
What impact do sanctions have on Russia and its willingness to talk with Ukraine's President Zelensky?
Well, on the willingness to talk with Zelensky, I don't think this has much of an impact because Vladimir Putin doesn't acknowledge Volodymyr Zelensky as the legitimate leader of Ukraine. He's made that clear time and again. Ukraine, on the other side, says it is ready at any time to talk to the Russian side and have meaningful conversations when it comes to an end of the war, an end of those attacks, but Russia simply is seeking for Ukraine to surrender, and it's not something that Ukrainians are ready to do. No, even when we think about the occupied territories, those territories, 5 regions which are partially or completely illegally occupied by Russia, it is enshrined in the Ukrainian constitution that those territories belong to Kyiv and are part of the Ukrainian state. So even if Volodymyr Zelensky came at the table of any negotiations, he wouldn't recognize those regions as Russian. And that is one of the demands from Moscow. And those demands haven't changed since 2022.
And Emmanuelle, over the weekend, the final stage of a 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap took place. Is this a major development? How did it take place and what were the logistics involved?
Well, this is a very important development for the 1,000 families that were affected on the Ukrainian side because they managed to see their loved ones whom they hadn't seen for the majority of them for many years. Some Ukrainian prisoners of war who were liberated had been captured after the fall of Mariupol, so in May 2022, and some of the families hadn't had even a letter from their loved ones in all that time. And Russia is not respecting the Geneva Conventions on the treatment of prisoners of war. So those men and women come back from captivity, in a very dire state. Many of them are sick. Most of them will spend weeks in rehabilitation before being able to go back to their families. So it's of paramount importance for families to retrieve their loved ones. But as good of a news as it was, and it's the biggest exchange since the beginning of the war in 2014, we have to keep in mind that there's still at least 8,000 soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, who are at the hands of Russians in Russian jails. And there's also at least 16,000 civilians who are also wrongly imprisoned and who are in Russian jails. And for all those people, as well as for the at least 20,000 children, Ukrainian children who have been forcibly deported to Russia, Kyiv and Ukrainians are demanding their return on Ukrainian soil.
Emmanuelle Chaze reporting from Kyiv. Thanks so much for updating us and talking to us.
Thank you.